The storm had not yet reached the city when Elara crossed the glass bridge. Beneath her, the sea of clouds shimmered like molten pearl, rippling in slow, endless spirals around the towers of the Conclave of Spires. Each spire was a needle of light, humming softly with wards and sigils older than empires. The air itself sang a sound like 1,000 voices whispering prayers at once. Elara stopped at the midpoint of the bridge and drew her cloak tighter. From this height, she could see the whole continent of Valithar spread beneath the clouds. Endless forests, the shimmer of rivers, the far line of mountains glowing gold in dawn's first light. It was beautiful and utterly alien. Humanity had only been known to the Conclave for 5 short years. The old races, Elfkin, Stormborn, Elementals, Spirits, and beings older than words, had ruled these lands for 10,000. To them, humankind was a rumor, a curiosity born from the forgotten south, and Elara was their envoy, the first of her kind to ever walk these halls. She had been chosen not for her rank or her title, but for something older, something the sages called the persistence of humankind, the ability to dream even when the world said dreaming was folly. Now, as she approached the high gates of the Conclave, she wondered if persistence would be enough. The gates opened before she could knock. 2 wardens, tall women clad in mirror-polished armor that shimmered like moonlight, stood on either side. Their eyes glowed faintly with runes of soul sight. They did not speak, but the silver filigree on their armor rippled as they communed wordlessly with the Conclave's inner wards. Then, with a silent bow, they gestured for Elara to enter. Inside was the Hall of Harmonies, a vast amphitheater carved from living quartz. Light flowed through the translucent walls, splitting into thousands of colors that painted the floor in liquid rainbows. The air was filled with the murmurs of 100 voices, some deep and resonant, some crystalline and musical, some barely whispers on the edge of thought. This was the Conclave Council, where the ancient races met to decide the fate of worlds. As Elara entered, the murmurs fell to silence. Every eye turned toward her, the human, the outsider, the experiment. The council speaker rose. She was tall, skin like polished obsidian, and hair that glowed faintly gold beneath the crystalline dome. Her 4 slender arms moved with slow grace as she spoke. "Welcome, Elara of the Dawnfire lineage. You stand before the Conclave of Spires to represent your people. The council will conduct the soul reading to determine whether humankind may dwell among the high races." Elara bowed. "I am honored, speaker. Humanity seeks not dominion, only fellowship." A ripple passed through the gathered lords, an unspoken conversation in colors and scents and pulses of magic. The speaker nodded. "Then let the reading commence. Loremaster Seraphina of the Azure Order will perform the rite." From the shadowed arc of the chamber, Seraphina stepped forward. The crowd shifted as though a star had moved among them. She was impossibly tall, her skin faintly luminescent, like moonlight seen through glass. Her hair floated in a slow current of unseen energy, a river of silver gold that caught every flicker of light. And her eyes, deep as ocean trenches, seemed to hold both infinite sorrow and infinite wisdom. An ethereally beautiful woman, yes, but her beauty was only the outer shell of something far older, far deeper. She was a soul seer, one of the rare beings who could read the living essence of any creature, peeling back memory and dream to reveal the true core beneath. It was said Seraphina had read the minds of gods and monsters alike. None had ever harmed her. None had ever resisted her. Until, perhaps, today. She approached with the stillness of a drifting feather, her presence so serene that even the council bowed their heads. Her voice was soft, but it filled the chamber effortlessly. "Elara of the Dawnfire lineage," she said, "do you give consent for the reading of your soul thread?" Elara hesitated only a heartbeat. "I do." Seraphina smiled faintly. "Then think of what peace means to you. Let your thoughts rest there." The hall dimmed as the ritual began. Seraphina raised her hand, and threads of blue light spiraled from her fingertips, weaving runes of ancient design in the air between them. Each rune was a symbol of truth, binding her senses to the realm of the soul. Elara took a slow breath. She thought of her home, a small village by a river of white stone. She thought of her grandmother's stories, told by firelight stories, of heroes and dragons, of grief and triumph, of all that had come before humanity's rise. Her mind quieted. Seraphina reached out and laid 2 fingers against Elara's forehead. A pulse of light filled the hall, and then everything broke. The soul seer screamed. It was not a sound of pain alone, it was the sound of something ancient shattering. Every crystal in the hall trembled. The colors bled from the walls. The council reeled back, clutching their temples as psychic resonance tore through the chamber. Seraphina fell to her knees, still screaming, her hands clawing at her temples as light poured from her eyes. Elara stumbled backward, terrified. "What's happening? What did I—" But the speaker's voice rang out over the chaos. "Contain the seer! Shields now!" Wardens rushed in, erecting sigil barriers around Seraphina's convulsing form. The runes sputtered, cracked, failed. Even the strongest among the Conclave's empaths screamed as they were struck by waves of echoing madness. The very walls seemed to bend beneath invisible pressure. Then silence. Seraphina collapsed, motionless, her luminous hair darkening as if her light had been extinguished. The great conclave hall was filled with the smell of scorched air and the sound of breaking breath. Elara stood frozen, her hand trembling. I didn't do anything," she whispered. But the way the council looked at her like she had unleashed something ancient and terrible made her doubt her own words. Hours later, Elara sat alone in a crystal chamber high above the city. Rain had begun to fall outside, painting streaks across the transparent walls. The air tasted faintly of ozone and worry. She had been questioned gently, then less gently by every kind of mind reader and empath the Conclave had. None could explain what had happened. Seraphina remained unconscious, her spirit flickering faintly between realms. A soft chime broke the silence. The door opened, and a figure entered, a tall, furred scholar with kind eyes and a hunched gait. He was a Lorite, one of the Conclave's intellectual orders, tasked with studying soul magic. "Lady Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I am Master Kythen of the Order of the Deep Mind. I was asked to watch over you." Elara rose, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did I hurt her?" Kythen hesitated. His 6 fingers flexed over the edge of his robe. "She is alive," he said softly. "But her mind is unsettled. When she touched your essence, something within her unraveled." "I didn't fight her," Elara insisted. "I didn't resist." "I know," Kythen interrupted gently. "That is what troubles us most. There was no malice in your thoughts, and yet the strongest soul seer in the realm was undone by a single touch." He lowered himself onto a hovering seat, fur bristling slightly with the motion. "Tell me what you were thinking when she touched you." "My grandmother's stories," Elara said. "The ones I grew up with." "Stories?" Kythen's brow furrowed. "What kind of stories?" "All of them," she said simply. "Heroic ones, tragic ones, myths and fairy tales. The ones that made me love the world." Kythen's eyes glimmered with curiosity and unease. "All of them?" he repeated. "You were thinking of more than one?" Elara nodded slowly. "I suppose I was remembering them all at once." The scholar's fur rippled. "That may be important." That night, the Conclave trembled with rumor. Some said the human envoy's mind contained a curse. Others whispered that she was a vessel of forgotten gods. A few claimed she had no soul at all, only mirrors that reflected others. At dawn, the speaker summoned Elara again. This time, the Hall of Harmonies was dim, the colors muted. Seraphina lay upon a bed of crystal at the chamber's heart, her breath slow, her eyes unfocused. Around her stood a circle of soul seers, their hands linked by strands of silver light. Kythen stood among them, holding a rune slate alive with shifting patterns. He beckoned to Elara. "She asked for you." Elara hesitated. "She's awake?" "Barely," he said, "but her first words were your name." Elara stepped forward, her boots echoing on the glass floor. When she reached the bedside, Seraphina's gaze found her, and for the first time, Elara saw fear in eyes older than empires. "Too many," Seraphina whispered. "Too many voices." Her voice was fragile, breaking like thin glass. Kythen leaned forward. "What do you mean, Lore Master?" Seraphina's pupils dilated, her glow flickering weakly. "I touched her soul, I expected to find one thread, one pattern of being. Instead, I found a storm, 1,000 threads, each alive, each speaking. Everyone believed it was her. Elara's pulse quickened. I don't understand. The seer's gaze unfocused, drifting beyond the ceiling as if seeing things invisible to others. When I entered your spirit, I became others. I was a queen and a peasant, a warrior and a wolf, a mother and a child. I was all of them, and all were real. They weren't illusions or fragments. They were alive. The soul seers around her murmured in alarm. Caithin's fur stood on end. You're saying the human's mind houses multiple conscious entities? Not entities, Seraphina said faintly. Echoes. Each one a story. Each one alive through her belief. She reached for Elara's hand, trembling. When I touched you, they saw me. They spoke. They tried to understand me, but they were too many. I could not hold them all. Her grip tightened. Do you know what you are, child? Elara shook her head, fear creeping into her voice. No, I'm just human. Seraphina's lips trembled in something like awe. No, you are a chorus, a living chorus of myth. The revelation spread through the conclave like wildfire. Within hours, every scholar, mage, and empath in the city was debating what it meant. Humans, it seemed, were not singular beings. Each carried within them the echoes of every story ever told, every legend remembered, every myth believed. They were myth weavers, living archives of ancestral imagination. Elara spent her days under observation as Caithin conducted cautious experiments. Each test revealed something more impossible than the last. When asked questions, Elara would unconsciously draw upon the voices within her, answering with the logic of a scholar, the courage of a hero, or the cunning of a trickster. Each response carried the tone of someone who had never existed and yet felt undeniably real. Caithin documented everything, his quill trembling. This defies all known laws of soulcraft, he muttered during one session. You think like 100 minds, and yet remain whole. Elara smiled faintly. Maybe that's just what humans do. We remember what we've never been. On the 7th day, the speaker herself visited. Elara of the Dawnfire lineage, she said, her voice echoing with ritual weight. The council demands to know whether this condition of yours is a danger to others. I don't know, Elara said honestly. All I have are stories. How can stories harm anyone? The speaker's forearms folded in slow, uneasy grace. Stories shape the soul. The conclave is built upon the memory of ancient truths. If your people carry myths as living spirits, you may wield a kind of magic we do not yet understand. Elara's heart tightened. You think I'm dangerous. I think you are new, the speaker said, and that is always dangerous. That night, Elara could not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the lights of the spires shimmer through the mist. In her mind, she could hear them, the faint murmur of countless voices, some familiar, some ancient, some nameless. They whispered advice, comfort, warnings. You are not alone, said one, the voice of her grandmother. You carry us all, said another, deep and warm like a hero from legend. You must be careful, murmured a third, sharp and fearful. They will not understand. She pressed her hands to her temples. Please, she whispered, one at a time. But the voices only laughed softly, the laughter of humanity itself. At dawn, a message arrived from Caithin. Seraphina requests your presence. She says she remembers what she saw. Elara hurried to the seer's chamber. The moment she entered, she felt the weight of revelation in the air. Seraphina was stronger now. She sat upright, her glow returning, though her eyes still trembled with haunted memory. Elara, she said softly, I have seen your people's gift, and I have seen its cost. That's Izidi, in Cinnamon and Anues. Elara hesitated. Gift? Seraphina nodded. Your kind can weave souls out of story. You do it without intent. Each tale you tell becomes an echo within you. But together, Together, your kind could shape reality itself. Elara's breath caught. That's impossible. Is it? Seraphina smiled faintly. All magic is belief made manifest, and your kind humans believe more fiercely than any other. She looked toward the dawnlight spilling across the floor. If ever your people learned to believe in one story together, they would create something the world has never seen. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Seraphina's expression darkened. And that, my dear, is what the Silent Legion fears most. Elara frowned. The Legion? Seraphina nodded gravely. An empire of shadow mages beyond the northern veil. They wield domination of the mind, enslaving whole nations through psychic chains. To them, your gift is both the perfect weapon and the perfect threat. Elara's heart pounded. Then they'll come for us. They already are, Seraphina whispered. The storm that began with our touch has awakened something ancient. The world is listening. Lightning flared outside, striking the high towers. For the first time since her arrival, Elara felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. Not as a scholar or a diplomat, but as something else entirely. A myth waiting to be written. Dawn came bolt by bolt. Lightning stitched the sky over the Conclave of Spires, and rain braided itself down the glass buttresses like strings of beads. The storm didn't break, didn't relieve, but hovered on the edge of the city like a hand that hadn't decided whether to strike or bless. Elara stood in the high observatory, a ring of crystal windows and humming sigils surrounding her. She wore a plain envoy's cloak, but nothing about her looked plain. Master Kython had never put much stock in the word beautiful. He preferred words like proportional, symmetrical, harmonious. He collected forms the way scholars collect texts, curious, appreciative, respectful. But as he watched Elara adjust the collar of her cloak and stand bare-faced beneath the stormlight, he understood why the wardens had whispered that other word. Ethereal. It wasn't that her features were flawless, though they were sharp and soft in all the right places, the sheen of river pearls in her eyes. It wasn't the way her hair caught stray light and held it as though the sun trusted her. It wasn't even the calm in her posture, the unstudied grace that made queens look like they were imitating her. It was the feeling around her, the way the air seemed to listen when she breathed, the way silence gathered at her lips, as if waiting to be told what to become. She was beautiful, the way a promise is beautiful, because it contains a future. Kython cleared his throat, embarrassed with his own sentiment. We'll begin. Elara smiled simple, human, unguarded. Tell me what to do, master. To our graces, he motioned toward the circle etched into the floor, a lattice of silver threads that curved through 7 runes of recollection and 9 of restraint. The circle had tested storm priests, oath-binders, and once a god's cupbearer who swore he could carry the weight of an ocean in memory. None had ever broken it. Some had failed to move it. Elara stepped inside, as if stepping across a doorstep. The sigils shivered. Soft light climbed her ankles. Hands at your sides, Kython said. Breathe naturally. Think of your grandmother's stories. Elara's eyes warmed. I always do. The hall's shutters closed with a soft whisper, leaving only the glow of the inscribed circle and the thin blue of the storm outside. 6 soul seers stood in a crescent along the wall. Seraphina among them, pale but standing, her glow returning like dawn after grief. Opposite them, 3 wardens watched from behind layered veils, blades sheathed, palms open. Kython raised a rune slate. We will test for 3 capacities. First, retained echoes. How many living story patterns dwell within you at a breath? Second, separation, your ability to distinguish your own thread from theirs. Third, projection. Whether you can let an echo sit in your skin and speak through you without breaking the skin. Elara nodded, unafraid. Or perhaps afraid and determined, which Kython had come to recognize as the human way of not being afraid. On the count of 5, he said, let them come as they wish. No doors closed, no hands on reins. He counted. On 2, the air changed. On 3, the sigils brightened. On 4, Kython felt like he had put his ear to a hive of bells. And on 5, Elara lifted her face, and the room became a market of souls. He had expected murmur, he got chorus. The sound wasn't sound at all. It was the sensation of being looked at by 100 lives from behind her eyes. Kythen's fur lifted as if winter had walked into the hall. He did not see phantoms. He experienced perspectives. A queen measuring a treaty. A thief tasting the edges of a lie. A midwife counting breaths with calloused thumbs. A hunter notching the wind itself. They clustered and braided, then parted of their own will, the way birds break and reform in flight. The runes that measured count blew past their carvings and re-etched themselves higher in the air. Steady, Kythen breathed, the scholar in him scrambling to keep up with the astonished creature in him. Seraphina's pupils dilated, her threads humming like taut strings. "She's not breaking," the soul seer whispered. "She's hosting." Elara's fists curled, not tight, only present. "They're excited," she said softly. "They like that you can hear them at last." Kythen worked his quill. "They like." It was a conjugation that meant more than grammar. "Separation test," he said. "Elara, choose one echo. Only one. Ask it to speak, and the others to be silent." He waited for the inevitable failure. No one had persuaded a crowd of souls to hush since the dawn trials, and those were myth. Elara inhaled. Her lashes lowered. The circle brightened, then cooled like heated steel dropped in snow. And then the room changed again, not to many, but to one. The scent of pine. A cold river. A woman's hand steady on a bowstring. Kythen looked up as if he would find mountains growing out of the floor. Elara opened her eyes. They were still Elara's, but the focus in them could undress a lie. When she spoke, her voice carried a low northern rhythm. "Name's Rowan of the Ridge," Elara said. "Winter took my husband, the mountain took my son. The world didn't take my aim." Kythen's quill scratched too fast and nearly broke. How many heartbeats did that take you?" Elara blinked. Her breath clouded as if the air had cooled 10 degrees. Then she loosened the bowstring that wasn't there, and the mountain went home. She was Elara again, eyes warmer, edges softer. 3 heartbeats, Seraphina said, wonder draped like silk on her words. She asks, and they obey. "Not obey," Elara said, and the correction was gentle. "We agree. They don't love reins. I don't love cages. We bargain." Seraphina's lips quirked. A human word for diplomacy. Bargain. "Separation confirmed," Kythen murmured, the rune slate flickering with his notes. He could feel the tremor of history moving under his feet. Now, the third capacity. Projection. A warden shifted behind her veil. "Is that safe?" Kythen's quills bristled. "Define safe." Seraphina lifted a hand. "We need to risk a responsible danger." She stepped into the outer band of the circle, threads of her own craft twining around her wrists like thin bracelets of light. Her beauty this morning had the tremor of a bell recently struck, power restrained, not lost. "Elara," she said, "this will be a called projection. Pick an echo of your choice. Let it sit in the front of your mind. Then, if you can enfold me in it. Do not pry. Do not pull. Open the door to the story, and ask it to become real for me alone while I am inside your soul field." Elara's mouth quirked. "Like telling a tale to one listener." "Exactly," Seraphina said. "Just remember that I can feel with the skin of the mind." Elara took a breath. Kythen could feel her thinking how she scanned her inner choir like a hostess looking down long tables, who could sit near who without starting a food fight. "Something gentle," Elara murmured. "Something every child knows." Her eyelids lowered, her shoulders settled. The storm outside leaned closer to hear, and then the hall filled with the smell of apple blossoms under snow. A hush of white drifted across Kythen's nerves. Not cold, clean. Somewhere a hearth popped. Somewhere a mirror whispered truth. Somewhere a woman with skin like winter glass exhaled into sleep while the woods kept watch. It was a tale the nursery nurses had told in 100 countries. The maiden of winter glass, who outlived envy by loving the world anyway. Seraphina stepped forward and the world shifted around her. Kythen watched her features soften with the gravity of dream. The soul seer's hands floated, fingers open, as if catching snowflakes that were thoughts. The silver threads around her wrists brightened, warmed, not burned. She inhaled like someone who hadn't smelled spring for years. After 3 breaths, Elara lifted a finger. The blossoms folded back into quiet. Hearth ash, mirror sigh, winterglass lay back down in the cradle of story where it had come from. Seraphina opened her eyes, wet, smiling, not fragile, but grateful. I was there, she said. Not a memory, not an image, a place. The story had weather. Kythin leaned on his slate. Projection confirmed, he croaked, and the scholar in him wanted to sit down. By all wards, confirmed. The wardens glanced at each other behind their veils. Kythin didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. If this woman can build weather inside a mind, she could drown an army without lifting a blade. Seraphina wiped at her cheek and laughed softly when her finger came away shining. It's all right, she told the wardens, and somehow it sounded like an order they wanted to obey. She could have buried me in that orchard. She gave me a path out instead. Elara shrugged, a little shy. A story that traps is a bad story. Kythin wrote that down too, and circled it twice. Word flew faster than ravens. Kythin had promised discretion. Seraphina had sworn the circle sealed, but nothing seals perfectly when awe is involved. The Conclave is a city of echoes, song, rumor, prayer, designed to carry. Even walls here have memories. By nightfall, the sky above the lower terraces was alive with lantern moths bearing whispered letters. By morning, the river market sang a new tune about a human girl who could make winter bloom in summer and sleep in the mind like a lover who warms without burning. By noon, a crystal courier from the far watch came barefoot and trembling to the Hall of Harmonies, her hair full of rain, her knuckles white around a sigil disc sealed in black wax. For the speaker's hands, she gasped, then swallowed hard. And for the soul seer's eyes. The speaker cracked the seal. Seraphina took the disc and laid 2 fingers against it. Shadow spilled like ink into the air. It formed a woman. She stood inside the projection, as if she had always stood inside every room that would ever hold a threat. She was tall and slender, wrapped in a gown the color of a silence that follows executions. Her hair flowed like a spill of starless night down her back, and her eyes were the cool gleam of struck obsidian. She was impossibly beautiful, the kind of beauty that looks like a decision, the kind that has looked into mirrors and refused to break, the kind that knows what it costs other people to stand in the same room and chooses to stand there anyway. When she spoke, her voice held court. Not volume, gravity. I am the Umbral Matriarch, she said. Keeper of the chain of quiet, mother of the silent legions, daughter of the first veil. The warden's hands went to blades. The speaker did not blink. Seraphina's glow cooled. You were listening. The matriarch smiled, and 1,000 oaths wished to be undone. My dear, we never stopped. Her gaze slid, precise as a knife's shadow, and found Elara where she stood behind the wardens. Little Mythweaver, the matriarch said, as if trying on the taste of the words. Come closer. Elara did not move. The smile sharpened. Wise. The matriarch's projection's edges tore slightly in the ambient storm, then knit, then tore again. She did not mind the flaw. She wore it like a veil. Here is my tidy truth, she said. Your trick threatens my order. Mind binds mind. 1,000 years of peace bought with the simple courage of not asking permission. And then you, child of Chorus. You walk into a city of crystal and teach the world how to dream together. It was already dreaming, Elara said, voice steady. We only named it. Names are chains, the matriarch murmured. And I own the forge. Her head tilted. A strange tenderness passed over her face. So quick Kythin would have missed it if he hadn't been trained to watch for humanity in monsters and monstrosity in saints. You have such a lovely soul, the matriarch said, and meant it. I will enjoy breaking it to serve a greater quiet. The speaker stepped forward. Leave our halls. Of course, the matriarch said amicably. I respect walls, and borders, and lines drawn in blood that dried so long ago we pretend it never stained. I am very polite." She bowed. It was perfect. It explained why people would let her inside their homes and only realize it when their children spoke in whispers for the rest of their lives. "My fleet will arrive by moonrise," she said, as though discussing weather. "I expect a welcome, fitting my rank, and a gift." No one asked what gift. The projection snapped shut like a pressed flower. The courier swayed where she stood. "She sent that to every city that listens," she whispered. "To every keep that keeps. To every order that owes her fear." Seraphina's hair drifted in a slow tide around her shoulders. Then the storm we heard it touch was hers. "No," Elara said softly. "She's only good at listening." The storm was ours. The Conclave does three things when faced with a siege. It prays to the past, it prepares for the present, and it tries to buy the future. Praying to the past meant the bell of first oath tolled beneath the city, a sound you hear with bone. Old banners were unrolled in chambers that smelled of naphtha and rosemary. Names were counted that had not been pronounced outside funerals. Preparing for the present meant ward weavers climbed the spires, stringing lines of light between towers, a net not to catch ships, but to catch intents. Harpoon ballistae were rolled to parapets they hadn't seen in 100 summers. Every warden oiled their blade and then folded their hands over it and practiced the most difficult art of all, waiting. Buying the future meant 100 runners left by secret stairs to bribe gods for fair weather, fishermen for fog, and thieves for information. Kython did none of these things. He took Elara and Seraphina down into the belly of the conclave, where the hallways are narrow and the lights believe in their own humility. They entered a chamber with no windows and a floor like a harp, the silver strings of old sigils stretched across a well of air. The city's heart sang down there, closer to the deep bell that had begun to toll steady as breath. "Projection practice," he said, as though they had all the time in the world. "You'll need more control than than the Maiden of Winterglass. Something tighter, specific. A mask you can put on and take off before your blood notices." Seraphina glanced at him, sidelong. "You intend to let her wear one echo hard enough to host another soul inside it?" End quote. Kython kept his voice even. "I intend to let her save lives when the Matriarch's mind blades arrive. If a soul seer tries to eat Elara's truth, I want them choking on a rind of lies, so convincing they thank her for the meal." Elara touched the harp floor with her toes and laughed softly when it sang. "What kind of mask?" "Choose something every child knows," Kython said. "But not so beloved it unravels you. Strong, simple, pattern. Desire, danger, door." Elara's face went thoughtful. She walked the rim of the room, trailing her fingers through the low hum. "Once upon a time," she said, voice so quiet even the strings leaned to hear, "there was a girl who could arrange the world by naming its pieces. She carried a basket. She wore a red hood because the forest respected color. A wolf tried to teach her a lesson about hunger. She taught it a lesson about roots." Seraphina tilted her head. "The red hood and the wolf's road." Elara nodded. "I can make the path. I can make the teeth. I can make the grandmother's door." "Good," Kython said. "Now make them for me." Seraphina breathed out. She stepped close, closer. Elara raised her hands as if parting curtains only she could see. The room moved. "You can build a place around a person the way a spider builds around a single trembling string." Elara spun the path under Seraphina's feet and let the trees appear. Not picture trees, trees tall and indifferent and full of time. She let the smell of crushed thyme and wet bark rise. She let the red hood drop light as a leaf onto Seraphina's shoulders. She let the wolf arrive the way hunger arrives, polite before it isn't. Seraphina's breath slowed, her gaze sharpened, every sense briefly ablade. And then Elara shifted the weave. This time she placed a lid on the pot so the story boiled without spilling. She drew the circle tight. Wolf, hood, door, bed, and made it so simple, even terror would have to respect the form. "Knock," Elara whispered. Seraphina knocked. "Who's there?" said a grandmother whose voice was a blanket. "Only me," said Red Hood. and Seraphina's voice wore childhood like a borrowed cape. "Come in," said a door that believed in hospitality. "Stop," Kython said softly. The strings stopped humming. Seraphina pressed fingertips to her lips and smiled a little, like a woman who has recalled how to be 10 years old on the safest day winter ever afforded. "If the matriarch sends a mine through your door," she murmured, "it will meet a wolf's mouth instead of your heart." Elara's face was serious. "If she sends 1,000 mines?" Seraphina looked up, and the stormlight found her cheekbones like old loyalty finds a commander. "Then we must teach 1,000 wolves to share." Kython's quill scratched. "We move to resistance projection. Seraphina, you will attempt a light soul touch on Elara, not to read, only to taste. Elara, you will feed her the road until she cannot tell where you end." Seraphina's eyes warmed. "Ready, child?" Elara set her feet. "Ready." The touch was a sigh of silk, a bloom of red, a laugh of teeth. Seraphina's hands trembled for the first time since the accident. She exhaled, staggered half a step, then whispered, "Wolf." Elara opened her eyes. "Too sharp?" "Perfect," Seraphina said, and relief and fear fit together on her face like two puzzle bones. "Anyone who comes looking for your oldest wound will end up counting fangs instead of scars." Kython wanted to cheer. He settled for, again. They did it again, and again, until Elara could call the road with a blink, the hood with a breath, the wolf with the kind of smile that warns and invites in the same syllable. She learned to let the door open into nothing but hallway, into safety, into a hearth, into a mirror if she wanted the intruder to see themselves and run. By dusk, sweat darkened her hairline. Her voice had acquired the raw edge of a singer who has chosen not to stop. Kython ordered water. Seraphina ordered an hour of quiet and a bowl of pears that smelled faintly of rose. They ate on the floor like children who had discovered a new game that might save everyone they loved. When the hour ended, Kython said, "One more, then rest." Seraphina nodded. "The Maiden of Winterglass again, but give me a false memory buried under it. Not Red Hood, something older, weightier. Give me a king I wronged, or a vow I broke. Make me believe it." Elara's throat worked. "That feels unkind." Seraphina touched Elara's wrist. "I would rather bruise inside a friend's story than bleed inside an enemy's." Elara took a breath, and the orchard came, as orchards do. They arrive, and you remember having always been inside them. Snow fell, not cold cleansing. Blossom scent and hearth pop and mirror sigh. Seraphina's lashes lowered. Elara lifted her left hand and turned one petal the color of regret. A face appeared in the frost on the mirror, the face of a king with open hands and winter built into his jaw. "I forgave you," the mirror whispered in his voice, and Seraphina flinched like someone who had forgotten the weight of that gift for too long. She inhaled, not horror, not collapse, only conviction. "I broke nothing," she said aloud. "To the orchard, to the mirror, to the story that would never be allowed to lie to her. I kept the only oath that kept the world. This is a mask." Elara dismissed the king with a blink. Seraphina opened her eyes, composed, collected. "More dangerous than mourning." "Please don't do that to me again," she said gently. "And thank you." Kython closed his book. "You two are going to frighten gods." Seraphina got to her feet. "We only need to frighten one woman and the iron chained to her voice." The rumor did what rumors do when they find the ears of those who are waiting for them. It left the city. Through a market woman's brother's lover who worked the bellows at the ward weaver's forge. Through a glass boy who loved a warden who could not love him back and so told him something else instead. Through an old scribe who thought he was speaking to his cat, when in fact he was speaking to a listening spell about a girl who could turn sleep into a shield. By evening, 3 things happened in 3 different places. In the Ash Monastery, where the Conclave keeps quiet archives about unquiet people, a sealed letter wrote itself a warning. The chain of quiet is moving. On the Dawnwater, a riverboat captain who never docked at night turned her lamp full and lit the secret pattern that tells watchmen to put out their own lights. Which is to say, if you want to live, don't be seen. And beyond the northern veil, in a palace cut from a single slab of shadow, The Umbral Matriarch lifted her head and smiled without showing teeth. She sat alone in a hall with no candles. She needed none. The darkness loved her, found her angles, softened nothing. The skirts of her gown hung wrong in a way that looked right, because gravity itself deferred to her command. A courier knelt with his forehead on the tiles. His throat worked when he tried to speak. He had no words left. She had taken them and threaded them into her sleeve. "I heard," she said, and her voice warmed the stones without changing their temperature. "They make weather in mines." The courier's back shook, not sobs, only the tremor bodies make when truth is too heavy for ribs. She leaned back in her seat, like a queen who had conquered posture. "Send the dread galleons," she said. "And the 6 quiet choirs. No horns, no torches. We arrive on weather." Outside, the sky over the northern vale obligingly forgot its color. The conclave saw them first as absences. You can count birds over a field in winter. You can also count the holes where birds should be. The dread galleons announced themselves by persuading clouds to keep a respectful distance. They sailed on that lack, hulls blacker than any honest night, sails the gray of old silk that had learned to whisper. Figures moved along the decks, like the arguments in a tyrant's head, confident, repetitive, thin. The quiet choirs did not sing. They let sound choose to go somewhere else. Even the storm tried to swallow its thunder rather than offend their silence. From the top of the eastern spire, Kython watched through a glass that only shows the true edge of things. The galleons cut toward the city not on water, not through air, but on the seam between belief and fear. The seam held for them like a road holds for a king's cart. Seraphina stood beside him in a cloak the color of the sky the hour before rain. She did not tremble. She did not pretend courage, required not feeling. Elara stood on her other side, bowless but steady, like Rowan of the Ridge had taught her to be. She wore no jewels, no medals, no borrowed sanctity, only a red thread around her wrist her grandmother had tied years ago and forgotten to untie. Kython lowered the glass. "They'll be within mind range by moonrise." The speaker's voice came from the stair, calm and terrible. "We do not surrender envoys." "Envoys," said a warden with a crack of pride. "Or children, or future," the speaker said. "But we do not pretend certainties we do not own." She turned to Seraphina. "Can you stop the choirs?" Seraphina's smile was a beautiful blade. "No," she said simply, "but I can give them indigestion." "And you?" the speaker asked Elara. Elara looked at the fleet that sailed on absence and felt her inner chorus lean into the wind. "I can make the road longer than they know how to walk." "Good," the speaker said. "Make it so." The moon rose bruised. The bells answered duty with duty. The galleons halted outside the net of light the ward weavers had strung between spires. A lacework of intention, old vows knotted into geometry. The net vibrated like a harp plucked by a giant hand. The sound traveled through stone into marrow. Silence settled on the fleet like a seal. You could smell cold iron from them, old rope, breath held too long. The matriarch's flagship drifted forward until its prow's shadow touched the lace of wards, and then it stopped because she wished it to stop, and because the wards agreed this was a good conversation. A voice hers went everywhere at once. Inside kitchens, inside helmets, inside the little curled place under children's ribs where the world keeps its first sadness. "Conclave of Spires," the Umbral Matriarch said. "My patience is a love song. It has a last note. Bring me the girl who wears a choir for a crown." Seraphina stepped onto the parapet, as if stepping onto a stage where all the seats are occupied by enemies, and all the enemies have paid full price, and therefore must be given full art. "Mother of Quiet," she called, voice not loud but clear as a clean cut. "Our stones are old. Our wards are old. Our promise to the weak is younger than both, so it is stronger. Go home." The matriarch's answer was soft. "Dear Seer," she said, and the word dear, in her mouth, had teeth. "I respect old things. I keep them in cases made of better words. I do not go home. I bring homes to heal." A pause, thin as a razor. "Do not make me walk to your door." Seraphina turned to Elara. "Ready." Elara nodded. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived in the conclave, she didn't reach inward first. She reached out not with command, not with plea, but with invitation. Come with me, she thought to every human in the districts, the alleys, the markets, the barracks, the kitchens. If you have ever been told a story, come stand beside me inside it. Bring your grandmother's whisper. Bring your favorite hero's stubborn. Bring the riddle you solved alone, under a blanket with a candle. Bring the part of you that knows a road, because your feet remembered it before your head did. The city hummed. You can feel consent. It tastes like rain that remembers wheat. Elara did not tell them what story to choose. She didn't need to. The old ones know how to assemble. The younger ones know how to dance. Somewhere, a baker put down his peel and said the name of a saint he didn't believe in until dough obeyed him. Somewhere, a child lifted a wooden sword, and it became weighty with recognition. Somewhere, 10 women at 10 windows touched red threads on 10 wrists and nodded, unafraid and unalone. Elara opened her eyes. Now, she whispered. The road arrived, not a picture, not an idea. A road. It ran in a red line through the air over the wardnet toward the flagship. Not straight roads that matter never are. It curved with history, bent around the places where courage made turns, and it widened where fear had to be allowed a little space to breathe before it could keep walking. A hush fell over the fleet like a hand over a mouth. Even the choir's silence paused to listen. There is a difference between the absence of sound and the presence of hush. One is no thing, the other is a throne. On that red road, wolves woke. 1,000 of them, no two the same, every one a lesson. Some wore cuffs of iron made from the chains of old tyrants. Some wore garlands woven by children who had met hunger and learned its name. Some had eyes like moons, others like coals. They were not pets, they were not nightmares. They were wolves, forged out of the rule that says, I will not be eaten without biting back. The road ran right up to the matriarch's prow and then stopped dead. The polite distance a hunter gives another hunter before deciding what the word neighbor means. Inside her hall of shadow, the Umbral Matriarch tilted her head, smiling like a woman reading an old letter she wrote to herself as a child. So, she said, pleased. A path. She lifted her hand. The choirs lifted theirs. Seraphina felt the pressure first, like the thumb of a mountain set to press a grape into agreement. The choirs rolled their silence forward, in a wave meant to slick the wards with acquiescence, to make minds forget where their own doors were, to teach souls to lie still and be tidy. Elara stepped out onto the parapet and raised her palm. The red thread at her wrist glowed. Door, she breathed. 10,000 doors opened at once inside the conclave. Not to the matriarch, to home, to kitchens where the soup is always a little too salty and everyone pretends not to mind because the person who cooked it is too tired to pretend they're not afraid. To attics where old letters forgive the living. To fields at dusk where the last sheaf stands taller than grief. The choir's silence washed over those thresholds and broke like a wave on steps it hadn't counted. A hush that had never belonged to them took them by the chin and said, Not here. The matriarch's smile thinned. It did not leave. She could admire a wall while imagining the shape of the hole she would cut in it. Clever, she murmured. But defenses tire. She lifted both hands. This time the galleons moved, their prows parting the seam between belief and fear and aiming straight for the wardnet. The choir's silence sharpened. The bells of first oath tolled again below the city. A heartbeat doubled. Seraphina looked at Elara. Elara looked at the city. And then Elara did the thing Seraphina had feared and hoped she would do. The thing that has always made humanity the most dangerous animal in any forest. She shared. Her voice was not a shout. It didn't need to be. It was a story told in a kitchen someone will remember when they are old because the person who told it was tired and still chose beauty. Humans of the conclave, she said. Remember the heroes they told you not to remember because they scare governors. Remember the clever ones, the ones who keep their promises even when the law breaks its own oath. Speak them, believe them, not alone, together. Let's see what happens when a world that builds itself on stories decides to build on purpose. The red road brightened. The wolves thickened like a rumor that has decided to be true. And far beyond the conclave, in villages where the only magic is bred, and quitting and starting again. In cities where the only miracle is that people still say good morning to each other. Humans lifted their heads and answered without needing to hear the question. A chorus began. It did not sing in unison. It sang in agreement. Names rose like constellations and then melted into patterns that had never existed and somehow had always waited. Saints traded tools with thieves. Queens taught blacksmiths how to listen to metal. Tricksters warned magistrates of the day their laws would have to grow up. Mothers put their hands on the heads of their sleeping children and said the old words, "You will not go hungry in a world we are present in." The matriarch's flagship shuddered, not with damage, with information. Her choirs faltered because there is a frequency of belief that makes even silence feel loud. She stood. She stepped to the prow, and the wolves parted for her the way reeds part for a boat that does not know the river's true name. Up on the parapet, Seraphina's mouth opened not a spell, a warning, a prayer, all cousins. "Do not meet her eyes," she said to Elara, soft, urgent. Elara did not. She looked at the road she had made and let herself be proud for one breath, then frightened for another. The Umbral Matriarch spoke into the hush the way winter speaks into orchards. "Let me in," she said pleasantly. "Little mythweaver, let me see the inside of what you are so I can decide whether to keep it or kill it." Elara lifted her red thread. "Door," she said again. But this time, she did not open it to home. She opened it to a mirror she had made from every story the city had offered her in the last hour. The matriarch stepped through. She did not hesitate. People who have bent worlds do not pause for domestic thresholds. It makes them feel common. She crossed into Elara's mind as though it were a room she had paid for in advance. She found herself in an orchard. Snow fell. The mirror waited. A wolf yawned politely and lay down so as not to disturb her dress. The matriarch smiled at the neatness. "Darlings," she said, "to the wolves, to the trees, to the girl, I do love a stage that thinks it can hold me." The mirror breathed. The orchard listened, and Elara, standing on the parapet of a city that was about to learn a new kind of weather, let the echoes take their places the way musicians lift instruments, at the same time, not because they were told to, but because they have practiced. Together, until timing has become love. "Welcome," Elara said, very gently, to the Umbral Matriarch inside her soul. "Grandmother is expecting you." The wolves smiled with all their teeth. The road stretched longer than conquest knows how to walk. The galleons crept forward. The ward net thrummed. The bells spoke bone to bone, and the first skirmishes of the War of Echoes began not with steel, but with a single, perfectly placed story. Snow whispered through Elara's mind, each flake a tiny, listening ear. The orchard she had woven from memory stood silent, a mirror beneath the trees, wolves half asleep in the drifts, and the faint glow of a cottage window promising warmth to whatever dared knock. Then the Umbral Matriarch crossed the threshold. Her presence bent the orchard's light. Every color dulled, except the sheen that clung to her gown, black so pure it drank reflections. Her face, carved in calm perfection, looked born from the idea of authority itself. When she smiled, it was the smile of a cathedral closing its doors. "So," she said, voice smooth as frost, "this is the human's mind, a nursery for noise." Red Hood, the echo of defiance, stood by the path. "Grandmother is expecting you." The matriarch's gaze grazed her like a scalpel. "Then let's not keep her waiting." She pushed the door open. Inside, grandmother lay beneath quilts, smelling of applewood smoke. Her eyes, bright and knowing, caught the intruder at once. "Close the door, dear," she said mildly. "You'll let the warmth escape." "I bring my own warmth," the matriarch answered, stepping to the mirror. "Show me what you are, little myth weaver." The glass rippled, revealing Elara's reflection. No, her chorus, hundreds of faces flickering behind her own. "I am one, and many," the mirror said in Elara's voice. "I am story that remembers who listens." The matriarch's smile tightened. "Then hear silence." Her will surged. The air congealed. Sound froze mid-breath. Wolves stiffened mid-snarl. Flakes hung suspended like shards of glass. Outside, on the Conclave's parapet, Seraphina felt the waves strike and staggered, clutching the rail. "She's inside her," she whispered. Cathan wrote furiously on his rune slate, the quill skidding with every tremor of the storm. Inside, Elara closed her eyes. Door. 1,000 doors burst open through the orchard into kitchens, forges, classrooms, taverns, graves. Through them poured fragments of humanity's ordinary miracles. Laughter over burnt bread, lullabies hummed to half-finished dreams, stubborn love that refused instruction. The matriarch's silence swept through and met company everywhere. Her eyes widened, pupils shrinking to slits. "Enough! Elara lifted her hand. "Rowan," she whispered. The huntress Echo appeared beside her, drawing a bow strung with wind. The arrow that left it was not iron, but definition. It struck the matriarch's brow and blossomed into words that wrapped around her like light. "You are a woman who mistook control for love." The silence faltered. A hairline crack split its surface. Then the midwife laid both hands on the matriarch's chest. "Breathe." Reflex won over pride. The tyrant inhaled, and the breath-filled hollows she had spent centuries emptying. Grandmother's voice carried through the quiet. "You've spent too long unmaking what you never understood." The matriarch turned to strike her, but the thief flicked a coin. It rang like a bell, and that bell became 1,000 others. The bells of every promise humanity had ever kept, despite despair. The orchard trembled with memory. "You fill rooms with noise," the matriarch gasped. "Not noise," Elara said. "Company." Around her, the echoes gathered. Queens, soldiers, poets, mothers, tricksters, wolves, saints. Each alive, each distinct, each refusing to vanish. Their voices overlapped, not in chaos, but in agreement. The matriarch's beauty shivered. Her silence cracked again, splintering into dust that glittered like ash in sunlight. Grandmother rose from the bed. The quilt slid away, revealing arms strong enough to carry generations. She touched the matriarch's cheek. "Go home, girl. Learn what noise is." For the first time, the matriarch looked uncertain. The mirror showed her unguarded face, lonely, exhausted, human. Pride kept her standing, but her feet edged backward. The door found her spine. "You do not get to own this room," Elara said quietly. "You are welcome only when you are willing to be welcomed." The matriarch's mouth shaped a retort, but the orchard itself breathed against her, and breath became gravity. She stepped back through the door and was gone. Outside, the flagship reeled. The choirs that powered it faltered, their perfect silence splintering into whispers. One voice, then 10, then thousands spoke for the first time in living memory. "I am here." The sound struck the dread galleons like sunlight through ice. Crews covered their ears as rigging hummed with alien music. The sails, woven from condensed shadow, blistered with light. One ship veered into another. A third simply dissolved into mist, its silence unbound. On the parapet, Seraphina steadied herself as the ward net pulsed brighter. "She's done it," she breathed. Elara's silence is louder than theirs. Cathan lowered his quill, eyes wide. She turned imagination into geometry. "Do you hear that pattern? It's coherent." "I see now. I see now." "I hear hope," Seraphina said. Below them, the matriarch appeared on her prow. Gown whipping in the storm she could no longer command. She raised a hand, then lowered it. There was nothing left to order. Her fleet drifted backward, captains staring blankly, minds echoing with human songs they did not know the words to. "Withdraw," she said at last, voice small but undeniable. The dread galleons obeyed. They turned one by one, slipping into the horizon's bruise until the sky held only rain and astonishment. The wolves in the orchard lay down. The red road faded into mist, and Elara, breathing hard, tears streaking her face, opened her eyes to the real world. The Hall of Harmonies gleamed like wet glass. Rainlight poured through the quartz ceiling. The air smelled of lightning and pear blossom. Elara stood at the center, her plain envoy's cloak hanging heavy with dew. The red thread on her wrist glowed faintly. Beside her were Seraphina, luminous again, steady as dawn, and Kython, ink-stained and awed. The speaker addressed the gathered conclave. We have survived a war, fought in the space between thought and belief. We have seen humanity weave myth into defense and imagination into law. We stand changed. She turned to Elara. Humanity came to ask permission. Instead, it gave us new language. A murmur rippled through the hall. From this day forward, the speaker continued, your people are recognized not as petitioners, but as myth-weavers, chorus binders, those who make belief tangible. Your stories have proven themselves a form of magic, one that does not dominate, but joins. It is Repel. She drew a ring of light around Elara's feet, each rune blooming like a note in a chord. By the authority of the conclave, I name you ambassador of the chorus, first of your kind. Teach us how to listen. Elara bowed deeply. And we will learn how to speak without drowning others. The speaker smiled, a rare, then let it be written. Power now answers not to command, but to chorus. Magic will no longer be measured by solitude, but by harmony. The hall filled with quiet approval. Wardens pressed fists to hearts, elemental lords inclined their heads. Even the ancient spirits flickered brighter for a moment, as if warmed by the thought. Kython exhaled shakily. Do you understand what you've done? He whispered to Elara. You've rewritten the grammar of power. Elara smiled through exhaustion. We only reminded it how to sing. That evening, the conclave celebrated as only the weary can, awkwardly, joyfully, grateful to still exist. Market bells chimed. Wardens shared wine. Children ran through puddles wearing wooden wolf masks carved overnight. The city, long trained to speak in whispers, rediscovered laughter. Elara walked the glass bridge overlooking the spires. Below, the reflection of the city rippled in the clouds like a second, dreaming world. Seraphina joined her, hair haloed in rainlight. For once, neither spoke of strategy. They simply watched. I thought I'd feel empty, Elara said, after everything. And? I feel full, not crowded, fed. Seraphina nodded. That's what happens when a meal is shared. They watched the horizon where the dread galleons had vanished. Only faint contrails of shadow remained, curling like ink dissolving in water. She'll be back, Seraphina said quietly. The matriarch learns. I hope so, Elara replied. Every story needs an audience, even hers. The soul seer studied her face. You're not afraid of her. Elara touched the red thread on her wrist. Fear's still here. It just has better company. A laugh escaped Seraphina, rare, melodic, alive. You speak like a poet. I speak like someone who's finally listening, Elara said. At dawn, the speaker met Elara on the bridge, bearing a crystal seal etched with shifting runes. Your charter, she said, for humanity's seat among us. Elara accepted it with both hands. Inside the seal, light-swirled echoes of every myth born that night. The wolves, the red road, the orchard, the grandmother's fire. What will you do first? The speaker asked. Elara looked toward the waking city. Teach our children that stories are blueprints. If we tell cruel ones, we'll live in cruel houses. But if we tell better ones, she smiled. We'll build windows. The speaker inclined her head. Then may your people never run out of words. When she left, Seraphina lingered. Ambassador, she said, tasting the title. It suits you. Elara laughed softly. It still sounds like it belongs to someone wiser. Wiser? Seraphina smiled. Perhaps, but no one more necessary. They walked back toward the conclave's heart. Behind them, the wind rose through the spires, carrying fragments of 1,000 tales told anew proof that myth had become material. Weeks later, travelers crossing the mountains swore they saw strange things. Wolves of light pacing along ridges, apple trees blooming in snow, ships made of song gliding above rivers. Kython collected every account, scribbling notes until his desk drowned in paper. Evidence, he muttered. Proof that shared imagination can alter physics. Seraphina read the reports and only smiled. Not physics, she corrected. Faithix. And Elara, humanity's first mythweaver, sat at her window, writing letters to Earth, to every settlement, every hearth. Remember this: belief is a living creature. Feed it with kindness, and it will guard your sleep. Starve it, and it will guard your cages. Choose which story you inhabit. She sealed each letter with the mark of the red thread and sent them out on the wind. Below, the city hummed with industry and invention. The wardnets now sang alongside the chorus, shaping weather, mending bridges, translating the dreams of strangers into languages both could understand. Magic had changed its definition. It was no longer a privilege of the few. It was a conversation. Elara looked up at the moon rising over the conclave, its surface shimmering faintly as though the orchard in her mind had left fingerprints there. "We're here," she whispered to her people. "To the wolves, to the world itself. And we are not alone when we decide not to be." The wind carried her words across the spires. Bells answered. The air thrummed with the hum of a new epoch, one built not on conquest, but on collaboration. Stories had always been real enough to save a life. Now, at last, the world agreed to behave like it.